All right, so this is Concrete Flowers, Contemplating the Profession of Philosophy by Christy Dotson in Hypatia. Cool. So, here we go. And thank you, Valpo, for suggesting this. Let's see. Can even do a bit of a zoom in. Why? What's going on here? Okay, here we go. This is Musings in Hypatia. I wonder what Musings is. I wonder if they have this is their editorial section. All right. On grisly ground. Philosophy has an extraordinarily leaky pipeline when it comes to retaining the small number of diverse people it manages to attract. Here, the term diverse people refers to people who do not merely voice choral support for what currently exists as recognizable philosophy. Okay, yeah, so we were discussing the article in Daily News saying, basically, why don't philosophers like the idea of doing drugs? And we were talking and saying, hey, maybe they're just gatekeeping and they don't like the idea that there's a shortcut to learning things. And so this was suggested because maybe they're gatekeeping recognizable philosophy. They don't. Well, yes, they do not. But yeah, there's no shortcut to doing work. That's the whole point. There's no shortcut to effort and discipline. But that doesn't mean that, maybe having a little bit more experience, some different experiences would be good for philosophers, as opposed to the very straight-laced people that quite often are in philosophy. So many here that do. Well, I know a lot of people, I'll tell you, there are different sorts of people in philosophy. Certain groups are more prone to, go out and get drunk than other groups. And so, yeah, that's all. All right, diverse people may or may not come from diverse backgrounds, but they almost always disrupt the monochromatic profile of the discipline of philosophy by the questions they ask, the methods they deploy, this is what we were discussing earlier, and the goals of their research. For example, I watch every year as one or two philosophically trained black women quit the field of philosophy with a sigh of relief. Yeah, they're happy to be gone because it's a pain in the fucking ass. The sigh often resembles a kind of gasping for breath that marks the end of tyranny and the beginning of freedom. Yep, they're happy they've got something they're getting rid of. More often than not, the final realization that serves as an impetus to quit is not, I have failed at philosophy, but rather, philosophy has failed me. It is the realization that philosophy, specifically professional philosophy, can and does fail some of its practitioners that will concern me here. Yeah, this is well written. I must say, you love the last few sentences, absolutely. And I am not an academic philosopher. This did not work out for me. So it's I am maybe not. I look and may sound much more like the academic philosophers, but I'm much more in the I'm not in the academic sphere camp. Okay. Author says, I find myself empathizing with Robert Solomon when he states, our critical scrutiny today should be turned on the word philosophy itself to realize that what once was a liberating concept has today become constricted, oppressive, and ethnocentric. Yes, she can write. It is quite possible that what passes as philosophy and professional philosophy has become constricted, oppressive, and ethnocentric. However, it is far more likely, as Donna Dale Marcano suggests, that it has always been thus. And though establishing this latter statement is beyond the scope of this particular musing, I do want to offer some preliminary observations that give rise to my skepticism about the potential for a field like philosophy to sustain a black feminist philosopher who holds reservations about current goals within philosophy and prevailing assumptions concerning what counts as philosophy. I've made at least two observations concerning professional philosophy that aid in creating an environment that may fail to sustain, to the point of complete elimination, many of the diverse people it manages to attract. They are 1. The general attitude that the main activity of professional philosophy is criticism, and 2. The seemingly limited existential professional possibilities within philosophy that can stifle the growth of its diverse practitioners. In what follows, I will highlight my general experiences within professional philosophy that have led me to suspect the truth of observations 1 and 2. So yeah, I don't know exactly what's meant by existential professional possibilities. Maybe that just means there ain't no jobs, which is fair. But and this is 2011, so the situation is only worse now than it was. Um, and B, the idea that what most people are doing is criticism. Yeah, that's not great. Because criticism is almost always a negative sort of thing. You're not producing much if you're always criticizing. So that's not really what everyone wants to do, like just criticize. So, yeah, so we've got philosophy as critique. A great deal of what passes for philosophical engagement is some form of criticism. Yep. Like, this is just, yes. A lot of this stuff is just being like, old person is wrong. Like, Plato, you're wrong about something here. It is fairly common to witness in those newly awakened to the world of academic philosophy the attitude that being philosophical amounts to being critical of others and their beliefs. I take the attitude of younger students of philosophy to be symptomatic of prevailing pedagogical taste within academic philosophy. Silly boomers, yes, Anne. I've ranted on the boomers more than once on stream. Out of the mouths of babes, some would say, ideas of philosophical engagement blossom into what Janice Moulton calls an adversarial method. Yeah, there's definitely people like this that think the ideal is Socrates and like going around being a gadfly, asking irritating questions. There's a reason they put Socrates to death, and people seem to take this as like, no, we should do things the way Socrates did. No, you should learn better, do it better than Socrates. But like this adversarial method is not always Let's continue reading. Hey, juggling, welcome in. You heard a podcast recently of someone saying philosophy isn't something you do for school, it's practice that evolves like working out. With that said, I'm philosophically obese and out of shape. To be fair, most people do not spend their time like thinking hard about stuff. Like, I don't blame them. It's hard work. It's exhausting to do philosophy. So the idea like that you're going to like, work out your brain, you can do that in multiple ways. But like to do it specifically in the academic way, I wouldn't suggest. It's, doing what I do, like reading stuff. This is not for everybody. It's just not going to be. But there's plenty of ways. You go read a good book, go read some sci-fi, go learn about the chat GPT stuff. You're going to get the ideas one way or the other. And so it's like, you might be a little bit out of practice, but thinking, if you're listening to that podcast, you are doing part of this. Valpo's trying to figure out who was saying smart things. Okay. So Janice Moulton explains, the philosophical enterprise is seen as an unimpassioned debate between adversaries who try to defend their own views against counterexamples and produce counterexamples to opposing views. Moulton goes on to judge this form of philosophical engagement harshly. It has inherent limitation, as does method. As does any method. Though Moulton highlights specific limitations to the adversarial method, what appears to concern her equally are the implications of privileging this one method over all others. In privileging any one set of epistemic practices, one always runs the risk of instituting ignorance by ignoring the limitations of those epistemic practices. Yeah, this is the whole problem we were discussing earlier, is that philosophers gatekeep these practices because they think this is what they study and they understand it better. But in doing so, they end up risking gatekeeping and becoming ignorant to other ways of doing stuff. Oh, so it was a comedy podcast that had a philosopher as guest. That's good. Comedians a lot of times are aligned with philosophers, pointing out like different aspects of life that other people aren't looking at. Valpo says, speaking of AI, Globalist the Elder was looking for folks to talk about AI with if I'm interested in. What's it called? Viper's Gratitude has asked me and Aris to go give a talk to some of his tech folks, and we agreed. That's going to happen in April. I'm not an expert in AI. I am a metaphysician, and do a little philosophical logic and other stuff. I am happy to talk to people, but if they want a philosopher, I can talk about philosophy stuff. But again, what exactly are they wanting to talk about? I feel a little bit I'm a little bit out of my depth. Well, I'm not really out of my depth talking the philosophy, but like, it's like I'm not an expert in this AI stuff either. So it's like if I'm happy to talk I'm happy to talk with the person. It's just, Viper said we should talk. I say, okay, I'll talk. But it's like, again, you're just getting a person like me who's good at has read a bunch of this stuff, so I know some things. But yeah, and I do have the setup for broadcasting, so it's not that hard to do. But then again, most people have Zoom setups nowadays anyway. All right, so yeah, privileging any one set of epistemic practices, and this is the issue. Like, if you think you're one way of doing it, it will always run a risk of ignorance. Because, I mean, hell, you can go watch Ghost in the Shell, the original movie, and one of the guys asks the major, why did you hire me onto this like super fancy unit? She goes on to say, basically, look, we're all the same and you're a little bit different, and that means you're going to act differently than us, and that will keep us from getting too rigid in our thought. Like, well said, major. Okay, so that is to say, if the adversarial method becomes privileged as the way to conduct oneself philosophically, such privileging renders other forms of philosophical engagement inherently unphilosophical. Without being mindful of the domains of knowledge, the adversarial method cannot itself uncover. Yeah, you become rigid into, stuck in your ways, and then you miss out on stuff. In this way, Moulton, in my view, calls for a kind of methodological pluralism in her essay, a pluralism that is not advanced by accepting the adversarial method as the primary form of engagement of all philosophical endeavors. I believe Moulton is right. The adversarial method of philosophical engagement is often taken to be a basic and universal form of philosophical engagement. The limitations of the method do not stop many philosophy undergraduates from understanding philosophy purely... do not stop many philosophy undergraduates from understanding philosophy purely as criticism and being critical. Yeah. And who would blame them? I certainly don't. Nearly 15 years after the publication of one of Moulton's pieces on the dangers of privileging the adversarial method for philosophical engagement, Graham Priest does precisely that. In his 2006 article, What is Philosophy?, one can find a definition of philosophy that is compatible with Moulton's understanding of adversarial philosophy. All right, just so you know, I'm friends with Graham Priest. So, like, he's a buddy of mine at this point. So I may try to defend him stupidly. But I doubt it. He can take the criticism. He's got plenty of... he's fine without my help. It fits so well that it is as if he read her article and agreed with her characterization of prevailing approaches to philosophy, and yet in the end he disagrees with her underlying call for methodological pluralism in philosophy. Priest offers a conception of philosophy that he labels philosophy as critique. The long and short of his account is just this. Philosophy has two projects, one negative and one positive. The negative project of philosophy forms the basis of understanding of philosophy as critique. Priest writes, learning philosophy is not simply learning a bunch of facts, it is learning how critically to evaluate people's ideas. Although criticism may be said to flourish in any field, it holds a distinct place in philosophy. Quote, what distinguishes the role of criticism in philosophy is, Priest writes, precisely that there is nothing that may not be challenged. The negative project of philosophy is inferred by the reality that unbridled criticism is characteristic of philosophical engagements. Hence, for Priest, quote, philosophy is precisely that intellectual inquiry in which anything is open to critical challenge and scrutiny. I wonder if he'd still agree to this. I could ask him. I bet he would actually disagree with this now. Like, he might walk this back nowadays. Why do you care if you forgot Priest was in it or not? Like, it doesn't matter. I just wonder if he'd walk it back. He might. He might not. Again, Priest is a competent philosopher, and this is why people criticize him, is because he is good at what he does. And so it's like, he's a common target. You think he comes off better in the next paragraph? Well, yeah, like I said, he doesn't need to be defended. He's written an ungodly number of papers and books and stuff. Priest also recognizes that philosophy has a positive constructive dimension and concedes that a conception of philosophy as predominantly combative criticism is not a terribly attractive picture. Philosophers are responsible for creating many new ideas, systems of thought, pictures of the world, and its features. It becomes clear that Priest regards the constructive side of philosophy as much the harder form of engagement. It is easy to be a knocker, a person who only critiques the positions of others, and altogether more difficult to offer criticism that is rooted in a rival theory. Criticism, Priest explains, is most powerful only when it has the backing of some rival theory. The new ideas in philosophy arise out of responses to and criticism of old ideas, so on Priest's own account, criticism has both negative and positive modes of engagement. Given this, it is striking that Priest's article is not called One Method of Philosophical Engagement, but rather What is Philosophy? It is the distance between the former title and the latter that raises the concern articulated by Moulton. Answering the question, what is philosophy, with an account of philosophy as critique, privileges this one method of engagement, representing it as paradigmatic for all philosophical investigations, projects, and or traditions. This is a troubling move, to be sure. Bye, Anne. If anyone does not know Anne, please go give Anne a follow. Lovely, smart, intelligent, beautiful woman. You can go chat with her on her stream. Give her a follow. Click the link at the top if you are not following, the little heart. Yeah. Have a great stream, Anne. Bye-byes. Yeah, so whatever. Graham knows what he's doing. Yeah, and so if he was saying basically it is all criticism in the end, he should be called out for that. He's wrong. But it does seem like he walked it back a little bit here. Anyhow, philosophical methods positing criticism as a foundational activity presuppose that historical and current traditions within philosophy have all the building blocks necessary to fashion an investigation that suits every would-be philosopher's interests. This assumption is clearly problematic. One of the reasons Moulton finds the adversarial method so limited is that it serves to restrict philosophical issues by enforcing a preoccupation with positions already staked out. Yeah, and this is one of the things. This is one of the really bad things, actually. You enforce with positions already staked out. If you are trying to publish academic philosophy, you have to have a lot of references. If you do not reference the literature, you are not going to get published in an academic philosophy journal. And so the idea that you can do something without having a position already staked out that you're criticizing is extremely difficult. Extremely. How many philosophy papers in philosophy journals, those who know philosophy papers or any of the academics here, you see with very few references? Almost none. Almost none. That's not how we do stuff. And this is a necessary requirement for getting published in a philosophy journal nowadays. And so this is a difficulty. If you are enforcing this sort of historical thing where you have to have references, you are in some sense already limiting the kind of arguments that can be made. Is gatekeeping in terms of like having to reference people. Of course, there are going to be people who said something in the past that are relevant to you, but it's going to be very hard to get published in an academic journal if you're not referencing other academic philosophers. Just how it is. What if the positions arising out of criticisms to current theories lie so far afield from or are so alien to my own inquiries as a black feminist that to engage them would be a complete waste of time? I cannot tell you how many times I asked myself this question in graduate school. Yeah, so this is the thing. If nothing you were writing has any references to like in the literature, how do you actually call that philosophy anymore? Or it is philosophy, but it's not what is published in academic philosophy. In graduate school, I could not for the life of me figure out why I should take the respected philosophers of the day, from Plato to Jacques Derrida, depending on the professor, as bedrocks for my own philosophical investigations when a fulfilling engagement with their work did not look feasible to me. This is not to say that such an engagement could not be fulfilling. Certainly some of the diverse people drawn to philosophy have found inspiration in such figures as Friedrich Nietzsche, Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, and many others. Indeed, some have found in them resources for addressing issues that particularly matter to them, race issues, gender issues, concerns with communal existence, and so on. Rather, my persisting concern was that if my philosophical engagement needed to be anchored in some standard conception of the history of philosophy, which the adversarial method requires, too many of my own questions would be left unexamined. So I agree with Moulton's call for methodological pluralism in philosophy. It is required if people like me, people who are dubious about the value of what passes as philosophy and or philosophical method, are to be sustained to the point where we can flourish in the profession of philosophy. Yeah, this is the thing. Writing papers like this is definitely limiting. I can guarantee you it. And it's taken me a very long time to figure out how to write what I want in the way that will at least get passed or get under review in a journal. Like, just getting yourself past the editor into under review so that someone can like read it is not so easy. And the idea that you're going to get good feedback and all that stuff, like a lot of times I'd just get like rejected. I'm like, why? Can't even tell. Or they'd say really weird things, but that's because you have to do it in this way. And so this is a restriction. The academic publishing, if you want to be an academic philosopher, has this sort of requirement on it, and it is very limiting in certain senses. Okay, so 3, on academic passing. When philosophy is conceived of as criticism, the philosophical projects that are popular now delimit what count as philosophical engagement, both in style and content. Yeah, so this is the gatekeeping right here. This is problematic. It is not unreasonable to expect in a field that has been dominated by a rather monochromatic population that the inclusion of diverse people will also introduce wider possibilities for philosophical engagement, or, at the very least, demand greater recognition for the existing diversity of methods available for philosophical engagement. Too often, people who voice skepticism about canonical questions and methods find they face a recurrent question. Quote, "How is your project philosophy?" End quote. If I could regain all of the energy I have expended thinking through this very question I asked, either in my own self-reflections or from an audience member at a paper I've given, I could run a marathon 100 times. This is a fascinating question. It also takes the form of a garden variety informal fallacy of the kind we all teach in Introduction to Logic courses, the fallacy of complex question. It presupposes that all parties to the discussion accept a common answer to an unstated underlying question. What is philosophy? To ask how a given project is philosophy glosses over the possibility that there may be fundamental disagreement about the nature of philosophy itself. And, make no mistake, the question, what is philosophy, is a deep philosophical question. Priest and Moulton clearly have very different accounts of the possible range of philosophical engagement, and as a consequence would no doubt give very different answers to the question of how their projects are, in fact, philosophy. Nonetheless, colleagues routinely and unabashedly ask the question, how is this paper or project philosophy, seemingly without any appreciation that the standard they invoke for what counts as philosophy is itself debatable. And I'm sure that like the people, like the academics in the audience now have heard this before. I don't know if like non-philosophers ever hear this, that like what they're doing is not real philosophy. It does get said though. Like this is not like good philosophy, or this is like bad philosophy, or like philosophers are, everyone gatekeeps or thinks what they're doing is like important philosophy. And so this is just like philosophers are arrogant. And this happens a lot, actually. Like, they're saying, they've gone off and they've done something applied philosophy. It's not like real philosophy. It's like, this is quite often crap. If people have asked me my opinion, the only good what I consider philosophy is how hard a question are you asking. This is not criticism. It's just asking what is the question you are asking yourself or somebody else or possibly someone else. But like, how hard is the question you're asking? And any area you're in, you can be asking a hard question. I don't care if you're doing like black feminist studies, or you're doing like logic, or you're doing whatever else, like different areas of philosophy, but how hard of a question is being asked. That's the only thing that I count as philosophy. If you're asking a very, 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 very hard question, then you're probably getting close to a philosophy question. Okay. When pressed on the underlying question, the justifications I hear are typically appeals to personal intuition, tradition, or authority. See that? I did not do any of those. All of them arguments that turn on other garden variety fallacies that the speaker would certainly reject if they were used to justify any other standard. The question, how is this paper, Project Philosophy, is pernicious not just philosophically, given its dubious rational standing, but also because of the exclusionary work it does. It is a question many diverse people in philosophy dread to hear and, indeed, often go to considerable lengths to avoid altogether. It is a question that puts pressure on anyone who does not embrace currently dominant conceptions of philosophy to pass as mainstream philosophers. This kind of academic passing takes a number of different forms. Some strategies of preemptive avoidance involve taking great care to travel, figuratively and literally, only the well-trodden pathways defined by previous philosophers. As a non-academic philosopher, I've put a lot of time into figuring out how to write a philosophy paper that passes in mainstream. I've done a huge amount of time thinking about this, actually. I mean, this is academic passing for me. I'm not an academic. I can pass as an academic, though. Academic passing is defined here as an academic performance in which scholarly work perceived to have somewhat threatening lineage, academic lineage, is presented or categorized by others as the kind of work that it is not. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say somewhat threatening, having somewhat threatening academic lineage, like... Actually, yeah, to be fair, I don't know what you mean exactly by threatening in this case, but yeah, it's just non-standard academic lineage or non-academic lineage or whatever. So, the pressure to academically pass makes the pursuit of a career in philosophy especially challenging for diverse people, not only because it is tedious and taxing, but also because the acceptance one's gains in the form of uptake and often meager professional respect follows from stifling one's creative impulses. As a result, academic passing often carries heavy psychic, personal, and professional costs. Yeah, not easy to do. Depends what area you're in that you can even put the time and effort in to figure out how to say what you want to say in an academic-y way. Let me summarize my observations thus far. First, academic philosophy is structured in such a way that established trends in philosophical thought delimited by... Let me restart in the sentence. First, academic philosophy is structured in such a way that established trends in philosophical thought delimit what questions can be addressed, and this is reinforced by the dominant conception of philosophy as critique. This effectively marginalizes problems and/or concerns of diverse people that do not fit comfortably within an already set disciplinary agenda. Second, even if one should find a way to navigate this first problem, the work one does to address new questions has to conform to entrenched conceptions of what counts as philosophy. It has to pass as philosophy to gain uptake. The result is exactly what Solomon describes: a, quote, constricted, oppressive, and ethnocentric mode of engagement organized around exclusionary practices that ensure that it will reproduce itself in its own narrow, monochromatic image ad infinitum. This reproduction will occur in the name of genuine philosophical engagement instead of the kind of monochromatic inertia that is probably a more likely explanation. You know, this is a sociological problem. People are going to do what they, learned how to do, and then anything that is outside of what they do is going to take more work for them to understand. And so it's always going to be easiest to stick with the status quo. And that's what happens, people get into big positions, and then they like what they like. They like their stuff, and then they, promote people who write papers like they do. Now, this is not good, but I mean, it's going to reproduce itself because this is how the structure of having power goes. It reproduces itself. It metastasizes. It makes itself like a part of the structure of the university, that this is the sort of thing. Like, who gets funding is going to be gatekept by the old guard because they've been around long enough that they have all the connections, they know the people who have the money, and that's what gets paid for. So this is the sort of thing. You do get this inertia, as the author says here. But this is, this is a sociological point. Not just the philosophical one where you have to pass into these people, but the sociology of the university. Okay. 4. Concrete flowers. Contemplating the price of the ticket. I have glossed over what is perhaps the most salient objection to my observations thus far. Why, as the question generally goes, should professional philosophers try to diversify their ranks at all? If the questions and projects of diverse people do not reflect current conceptions of philosophy, why not just say to them that they are not philosophy material and urge them toward a different path? This is a common question that is easily answered. I will content myself to only gesture at the answer here. Even if Priest's conception of philosophy as criticism calls for new ideas and alternative views, even Priest's conception of philosophy as criticism calls for new ideas and alternative views. Diverse practitioners will offer new ideas and alternative methods of philosophical investigation. Philosophy simply cannot survive as a discipline without the continuous creation of new ideas. Hence, it is in the best interest of the field to encourage practitioners who can aid in the survival of the discipline. This is hardly a controversial observation. A better question for this musing would be, why should diverse people ever commit to careers in academic philosophy at all? To this question, I have no universal answer. Responses would vary from person to person. By far the best question to ask is, can professional philosophy provide an environment that can sustain those who do commit to a career in academic philosophy, professionally and personally? My short answer is probably not. As the conditions stand, the diverse practitioner of philosophy is like a concrete flower. A concrete flower is essentially a weed that grows between the cracks of poured concrete, as in a sidewalk. Sometimes the crack is so small that the flower appears to be growing directly out of the concrete. I've seen several that look to be growing seemingly from nowhere. A couple of things are distinctive about these flowers. They give the impression of being strong survivors. After all, they, and often they alone, have managed to grow through concrete. On closer inspection, however, many concrete flowers are fragile and clearly starved for basic nutrients. They are, after all, growing in an environment that was never meant to sustain their existence. In fact, a concrete flower grows in spite of its environment. Malnourished and threatened on all sides by the concrete that would indifferently snuff the life from them, concrete flowers exist on grisly ground. If they were to flourish, they would produce a different landscape. Right now, many diverse people in philosophy are probably concrete flowers. A heavy professional and personal price is asked of people who do not give automatic approval to philosophy as it currently exists. The irony is that, despite defining philosophy as uncompromising, no-holds-barred critique, only some kinds of critical engagement are welcome, those that leave untouched the suppressed question, but what does count as philosophy? Paradoxically, leaving that very question suppressed makes it difficult to generate radically new ideas in the field. It remains entirely possible that the landscape of philosophy will remain the same at the expense of the plurality of approaches and questions that could be made available through the engagement of diverse people. There is, of course, more to say on these topics. Here, I, as a concrete flower myself, simply wanted to offer the silhouette of my current reflections on the profession of academic philosophy. Oh, look at this. Notes. Priest's article was published in Philosophy, which is a journal aimed at bridging the gap between professional philosophical positions on a wider educated public. As such, Priest's article is intended for lay audiences, not too different in terms of exposure to academic philosophy from the typical undergraduate student. So in other words, he was doing a dumbed down version of what he actually thought anyway. Okay. Yeah, so the funny thing is, like I said, I know Graham. Graham does Asian philosophy too. He's on the board of comparative philosophy journals. So it's like he actually is attempting to do comparative philosophy, getting Asian philosophy and Western philosophy to be in better conversation. So it's like he's actually, and this is maybe more recently, I don't know when he actually got into it. I think it was a while back. But like Graham actually does try to get other voices into academic philosophy. So he's like, I'm sure he'd actually agree with this article. Even though he said some dumb things back in the day, I guess. Yeah, so the price of the ticket's too high. I agree. Someone asked me last week if I'd go back to grad school. I said, no, I'm not going to go to grad school. I said, why? What's the point? Now, I continued to say I would if someone gave me a great deal. The problem is, this is the exact problem right here. It would suck to be a grad student with no job prospects at the moment, very little Like, you don't get a whole lot of money as a grad student. You'd have to give me a good amount of money or something or benefits, and I wouldn't want to write the crappy papers that I don't want to write. I want to write the papers I want to write, not the crappy papers I might have to write as a grad student. So it's like, I don't want to be in this exact position right here, where you're like basically trying to survive with like jagged rocks around you that are just painful. That seems like a terrible idea. And it's like, so I feel this. Like, this is like, why would you want to put yourself in this position where you're just in a very dangerous sort of space? Hey, Maddie, welcome in. Maddie Holmes, when I went to grad school, I told everyone straight up that I didn't want to go into academia, and I was like Cassandra before the Trojan War kicked off. Yeah, like, there is a definite thing. It's like, oh, you don't want to be a philosophy professor? Isn't this the greatest thing in the world? It's like, hey, there are other things to do besides being philosophy professors and writing philosophy papers. Like, absolutely. And it's very, very, it's not the easiest life. Not at all. Especially if you're already in a worse off position. Maddie says, I also kept pointing out that there was like one job for every anthropology student, and they did not want to hear, one job for every 5 anthropology students. And no one wants to hear that. So last week I ran into an old grad student I met a few years ago. She is doing extremely well for herself. She's got some jobs lined up, or a good job lined up or something. And so one of the new grad students was like, I need to talk to you how you pulled this off. Like, I don't think like 1 to 5, like it might be worse in philosophy. Valpo said, yeah, I had to give a student there are no jobs talk on Friday. Yeah, well, I'm honest about it. Oh yeah, well, at least Valpo is honest about it. But like, anyone going into academic philosophy should know at this point that there are basically very few jobs, especially depending on what area of philosophy you're in. There may be even no jobs, like, in a given year. Yeah. And you'll hear Aris talking about this too. So, I keep mentioning Aris. Anyone who doesn't know, Aristotle right here is another philosophy streamer. If anyone here doesn't know him, you can click on the little heart there and, check out his content. But, like, yeah, that's the thing. I was going to tell a story, too, about the drugs. Stealing another Twitch streamer's content, but what the hell, that's what we do. So, yeah, this is talking about, like, what's the, how do you actually expect anyone to have to do anything if you can't get paid, if you can't eat? You have to be able to eat to do philosophy. Like, you can't eat, like, pen and ink and paper. You need, like, paper to, like, you need food to live, and you're just not going to get that. But, like, what makes you think that without diverse people, without diverse experiences, you're actually going to have good philosophy? That's exactly the problem. You're going to stagnate. Philosophy is stagnating right now. And the argument here actually is that it's stagnating because of people. The argument in Daily News that we were talking about recently is stagnating because of experience. That we are having not enough experiences as philosophers. Are we not doing enough drugs, or are we all just very sober all the time? And that's not actually going to do us enough good because of the variety of experience that was going on. The variety of experience that we lack in philosophy. Maddie says, it's a big reason I went into genetics. I love it, but it was also different enough to have a lower competition. Yes, that's the thing. Like, if I was to ever advise anyone who wanted to be a philosophy major, I wouldn't say don't be a philosophy major. I'd say be a philosophy major, but get a minor in something else that will be good for you. Like, go be a minor in accounting, because maybe if you're good at logic, you can also be an accountant. Go get a paramedic degree. Do some philosophy of biology, but also go actually look at how to save someone's life, and then you can have more things. It's like, this is what I would tell people. It's like, go get a good minor. Manny says, I've long suggested doing completely different major minor mashups. Exactly. It's like, philosophy is a great thing, but there's not, unless you're going, like, the chance of you getting a job is low. And so that's the problem here, is that we're running low on ideas because the experiences that the people getting into philosophy are monochromatic, as they call here. They're just not calling them old white guys, but that's what a lot of it is. It's just old white guys from like upper class people who can afford to, go to good schools and study philosophy and don't have to worry about as much, money than because it's hard to be in a grad student. Like unless you have someone backing you, like you have something to fall back on, you're gonna have a hard time. It's just gonna be difficult. And then what I was saying is the experiences, even the people there, you're gonna get a uniformity of experience about people who are already in it, even within the range of like the sort of people that are there. Even if they're monochromatic, they could do more stuff, and then they don't. Yeah. Maddie says, I also work full time in grad school. I was super unpopular. Yeah, but like again, that would give you a different perspective on things. Having a job, doing other stuff, and yeah, if you're not like hanging out like in the like grad lounge all day, you're not gonna like make friends the same way other people will. So, I completely agree with like this paper. This is talking about two reasons, like the people. Like the style of argumentation that has been popular in philosophy is limiting, and the price of the ticket, like getting into it and then trying to do anything else, is going to be really hard because the people who hold the purse strings are the old fuddy-duddies who, are expecting a certain kind of philosophy because that was how things were done back in the day, which is not good. Maddie says, I got out basically even, so screw them. Yeah, exactly. It's one of those, doesn't matter, got your degree, doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. Like, so. Yeah. So, in the grand tradition of philosophy streamers, bitching about philosophy, academics, that's what it is. So, yeah. Yeah, like I want to say, like, this is, what is philosophy status of philosophy that, like, this author was Robert Solomon. I think Graham Priest is actually on the board of this journal here. That like Priest is on Philosophy East and West board, I believe. Because he actually is attempting to get like more voices in. Yeah, let's see. Anything else to say? So, what would I give this one? This would be navel gazing. If I was going to rate this one, this would be a navel gazing paper. But that doesn't mean it didn't have fun ideas in it. So this would be a fun ideas but navel gazing paper because it is about the profession of philosophy. And so it's just basically the only people who really are going to be super interested in this are people who are concerned, like me, with academic philosophy. And like Valpo and other people in chat, of course. And there are, I'm sure other disciplines within academia face similar issues. But still, it's like in privileging any one set of epistemic practices, one always runs the risk of instituting ignorance. It's what was it I said? You get brittle. You get very brittle if you're just looking at things in one way. And so you get a very sort of you run the risk of like getting brittle, creating cracks, and things slip through the cracks. And as an academic discipline, philosophy needs to be very worried about this. And that's the other thing. Philosophy takes a long time. It's like one of the things about the style of engagement, the argumentation, is you get immediate feedback. Like it comes back, like you have a better argument. Someone like, you engage immediately with the argument. It's an immediate feedback loop. Unfortunately, that's again a short-sighted view of things. Very short-sighted. Sometimes things take a while, and you have to give it more breathing room than just to say, well, here's the reason why your arguments don't work. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like these are your argument fails for those reasons. It's like, yeah, that's gonna happen every year. If you've seen any of my philosophy roulettes, all 420 of them that came before this, I criticize everything. That doesn't make it bad philosophy. Like, really, all of these things got published usually because they have some good idea, or at least someone thought so. And so just because I can tear everything down, that doesn't mean it's bad philosophy. It's like, yeah. It's like, this is you get the immediate feedback that's good for Twitch, like being able to yell at stuff and criticize wrong, wrong, wrong is good for Twitch. It's also one of those things, like I was criticizing Ben Shapiro earlier. It's like you're just riling up the internet. That's okay. That's content. But like, is that great for academic philosophy? No, that's not a great thing for academic philosophy. Okay, though. I don't think I have anything else to say. Let me know if any of y'all have anything to say.